Iran has not initiated a war with another country literally in centuries. And you've got the US and the Israeli regime that are responsible for most of the military aggression in today's world.
Hey, Taram, you are fired.
The US and Israel, two nuclear-armed states, are 1 month into a war of aggression on Iran. They say this is to stop Iran from getting its own nuclear weapons. But is any of this legal under international law? Joining us to discuss this is Craig Mokhiber, an international human rights lawyer and a former senior United Nations human rights official. Craig, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Dania. Good to be with you.
Obviously, you're an international law expert. You're an international human rights lawyer. Why is Israel allowed to have nuclear weapons, but Iran isn't?
Well, of course, it's one of the great ironies in all of this, or I would say, more directly, one of the great hypocrisies that we are witnessing here. Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, and it doesn't have a program to develop nuclear weapons. And this is, by now, I think, self-evident to anyone who has been paying attention. The evidence has been laid out for years that this is the case.
If Iran wanted to develop nuclear weapons, it could have done so many years ago.
The country that does have nuclear weapons is the Israeli regime. It's the only country in Western Asia that has nuclear weapons. Those weapons are completely unsupervised and undeclared. They are in the hands of an extremely brutal regime that is driven by an extremely violent and deeply racist political ideology. They have a specific doctrine of using nuclear weapons if they think their back is against the wall, the so-called Samson option. And they have a record of serial aggression all around the region, of belligerent occupation of the territory of others, and of crimes of transnational terrorism, like assassinations and murder using booby-trapped pagers and other crimes under international law. And yet there is no discussion amongst Western governments or in corporate media about the danger posed by the nuclear Israeli regime. So there's the real threat. There's the country that does have nuclear weapons, and there's the country that practices serial aggression and is a real danger, not just to Western Asia, but to the world. And yet not a word about that. Instead, all of the focus has been on Iran. They have long renounced the quest for nuclear weapons. They've codified that into their national law, even religious edicts. They've ratified the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They've opened themselves up for years to international inspections until aggression made that impossible. They entered into a formal agreement with the United States, its principal persecutor.
Because of this deal, the international community will be able to verify that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not develop a nuclear weapon.
The so-called JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, that would prevent it from developing any nuclear weapons. And that treaty was abandoned not by Iran, but by Donald Trump at the insistence of his Israel proxy donors. Iran has not been attacked because it has nuclear weapons. It's been attacked because it does not have nuclear weapons. And therefore, it has been viewed by the Israel-US axis as a target that could be defeated. I think they're rethinking that now as we speak. And it was attacked because it is the last major domino standing against the hegemony of the Israeli regime and the US in Western Asia. Iran has not gone to war, has not initiated a war with another country literally in centuries. And you've got the US and the Israeli regime that are responsible for most of the military aggression in today's world, objectively speaking, with attacks on countries, not just in Western Asia, but all around the world, from the Caribbean to Western Asia. There's no other country that even comes close to their record for aggression. Both of them are led by far-right racist governments with records of lawlessness. Both have been participating in the genocide in Palestine. Both, by the way, are headed by serial war criminals. Donald Trump has actually attacked in acts of aggression more countries than any president in US history. He's attacked 10 countries in his 2 terms, 7 just in the last year plus alone. So there's no one, I've said, who demonstrates more recidivism for the crime of aggression than Donald Trump. This is the guy who's murdering boaters in the Caribbean, attacking people in the United States for exercising their human rights. Netanyahu, literally an indicted fugitive from justice at the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. And yet you have governments like the UK that, rather than focusing on the real threats in the nuclear domain and elsewise, the aggression domain, are focusing on the country that is trying to defend itself from that aggression.
Some might argue, well, but Iran has been the sponsor or supported groups that have attacked countries. I'm thinking Hamas, Houthis. How do you respond to that argument?
This idea, this talking point that comes out of the West, that these are Iranian proxies that are somehow, causing havoc on behalf of Iran, is absolute nonsense. What you're talking about is countries that have been subjected to external aggression, foreign occupation, colonial domination, racist regimes, systematic murder, that have therefore, as is always the case in history, developed resistance groups that fight back as a deterrent, which is their right under international law. Of course, those carrying out that resistance has to also respect international law by distinguishing between civilian and military targets and so on, the principles of distinction and precaution and proportionality, all of that. But they have a right. And what has happened in the West, in countries like the UK and the United States, is in defense of the aggressor, and in Western Asia, we're talking principally about the Israeli regime, it has declared that anyone who resists that aggressor are terrorists. And they think that using the term terrorist is a magic word under international law. It is not. Terrorism is not even defined in international law. International law uses international humanitarian law, international human rights law, the law on the use of force to define what is and is not legitimate action. And you don't get to just declare that your enemies are terrorists and therefore suspend all of international law and say, one, these folks have no right to fight back, and two, we have a right to kill them. That's not how international law works. Hezbollah in Lebanon is a Lebanese group, born, bred, raised, and fighting for Lebanon, that did not exist before the serial aggression and occupation of Lebanon by the Israeli regime. Hamas is an indigenous Palestinian group, resistance group that did not exist before the 1980s and the atrocities, the serial atrocities perpetrated by the Israeli regime through occupation and colonization and systematic torture and extrajudicial executions and mass detention in dungeons all around the territory. But the idea that you can simply say they are proxies of another government, their alliance with Iran does not make them proxies. They're not fighting for Iran. They're fighting for Lebanon. They're fighting for Palestine. They're fighting, in the case of Ansar Allah or the Houthis in Yemen, they're fighting for Yemen. And by the way, those actors also have a right to intervene when a genocide is being perpetrated in defense of the population that is being genocided. So as a matter of law, all of these, smoke and mirrors that are deployed by Western governments to pretend that the entity perpetrating occupation, colonization, apartheid, and genocide is the good guy, and that those resisting those crimes are somehow the bad guys. That may work in CNN and the BBC, but it doesn't work in international law, and I dare say it doesn't work in any kind of moral analysis of the situation.
Why has the UN Security Council condemned Iran, but not Israel or the United States?
I think this is one of the most disturbing developments in the UN Security Council since its endorsement in Resolution 2803 of Trump's, by the way, entirely unlawful Board of Peace exercise that violates not only the UN Charter, but key principles of international law, including the highest principles, so-called jus cogens and erga omnes, principles of international law. And those dynamics have a lot to do with the co-opting of governments across the Arab region by the US and Israel going back for decades now, because what happens is those states, including, by the way, the Palestinian Authority, basically, encourage members of the Security Council to vote on behalf of atrocious resolutions like the Board of Peace and like this vote on Iran. But it really was quite stunning because the law is very clear. The aggressor in this case is the United States and Israel. And to have a resolution in the midst of an act of aggression, a crime under international law that was called at Nuremberg the supreme international crime, the crime of crimes, that crime being perpetrated openly by the United States and the Israeli regime. The dynamics in the Security Council are extremely worrying because the Security Council, while some people think it's irrelevant because it doesn't seem to be able to act in many cases, it's actually very dangerous because the Council is the only body in the international system that has enforcement power. And the idea that you would have a body like that that goes rogue, that acts outside of the powers given to it by the UN Charter, because it has no powers outside the UN Charter, and would actually adopt resolutions that violate international law. That should be a terrifying prospect for everyone, even if they don't care about Iran, even if they don't care about Palestine or Lebanon or anywhere else in Western Asia. So it's a very dangerous development. And now that it's happened twice, we can say that it's becoming a trend, and we should be very worried about it. The whole international system that was set up with a set of rules, including the highest rules, the prohibition of genocide, the prohibition of military aggression, is now coming apart at its seams. And Iran has tried recourse to diplomacy, and it has been tricked several times and attacked during those diplomatic initiatives. It has tried recourse to international law by ratifying the relevant treaties, allowing intrusive inspections, agreeing the JCPOA with the Americans, and that has failed. And it is left now with a situation where the only way it can defend itself and deter future attacks is all-out war of self-defense, which is what we are witnessing now.
I wanted to ask you on the flip side, Trump has given a lot of different reasons for justifying this war on Iran. First, it was protesters, then nuclear weapons, oil, the Strait of Hormuz. Do any of these reasons justify attacking Iran in international law?
No, it remains a crime. I mean, first of all, oil, which is one of the most honest justifications. The reason they're attacking Iran is because of the oil reserves that it holds. But the other two reasons is that, one, it is a government that refuses to submit, one of the only recognized government in Western Asia that has refused to submit to the U.S. empire and maintains an independent domestic and foreign policy. That it's the only one left. And then you've got half of Lebanon and half of Yemen. But in terms of recognized governments, there's only Iran. So there's oil. There's that resistance to U.S. and Israeli hegemony. And then the third very important factor is that it has stood in solidarity with the Palestinian people through decades of persecution. That is unacceptable in the eyes of the Israelis and the Americans. But of course, they needed to invent other sorts of justifications, because to say you're going to war for oil or for the Israeli regime or for these things are not going to convince the public to support their aggression. So they tried the nuclear justification, and just like the weapons of mass destruction justification that they used for the aggression that the US and the UK and others used for the aggression against Iraq, they tried that here again, and it fell apart very quickly because there is no nuclear program, and the perpetrators are both nuclear powers, and so that didn't hold up. And so then they tried to prostitute human rights because that didn't hold up. And so they recycled these old ideas that somehow they're murdering the Iranian people in order to defend the human rights of the Iranian people, right? They've done so by fabricating atrocities, exaggerating claims about the number and nature of those who were killed during the protest in the beginning of the year. Donald Trump stood up and said the Iranians were cutting the heads off of babies and cutting women in half. The same lies that they invented to justify the genocide in Palestine. They grossly exaggerated and didn't disaggregate the casualty numbers from the January protests, claiming as high as 50,000 people were mowed down by the Iranian government in just a matter of a couple of days. On its face, demonstrably false, which is not to say that people weren't killed, including by the government. They were, but it doesn't mention the hundreds that were killed by violent groups that were supported by the U.S. and Israel and the Mossad and the CIA, who were specifically sent in to foment violence during the protests, to try to destabilize and overthrow the government. And then most absurd of all, they tried to explain that they're murdering Iranian women and girls in order to liberate them with feminist bombs. And they also lose the human rights argument because what they're proposing effectively is the installation of the monarchy that would act as a puppet. By the way, the same family with Reza Pahlavi that was the brutal dictator that persecuted the Iranian people until it was overthrown in a popular revolution, that they want to impose a government that would be on the strings of the US, that would be serving the interest of the Israeli regime, that would be persecuting those who don't agree. And we would go back to the kind of deprivation that was witnessed under the brutal dictatorship of the Shah. No facet of their human rights argument holds up to even the most basic scrutiny. And so we know exactly what this is about. It's about oil, it's about the hegemony of the US empire, and it's about the domination of the region by the Israeli regime, because it is the last effective deterrent to Israeli aggression and genocide in Western Asia.